Geopolitics with David.
The real red line isn't in Copenhagen, it's in Congress. Because if there's ever a moment when the US system decides a president has gone too far, too fast, too risky, too expensive, it doesn't always show up as a court ruling or a dramatic resignation. It shows up as paperwork. It shows up as a funding line that quietly disappears. And here's the open loop. The most shocking reality in the Greenland story is not what Denmark says, or what Europe deploys. It's that Washington's internal brake is already warming up, before any grab even becomes operational. I'm Professor David O'Brien. I study how geopolitical shocks flow downhill into household costs: energy, shipping, borrowing, insurance, taxes, and the quiet price of uncertainty. This is educational content, not financial advice. Do your own research and consider professional guidance. By the end, you will understand three things: what's happening inside Congress right now, the real mechanism behind it, how money becomes a hard stop, and what to watch next, because the next phase won't be decided on the ice. It'll be decided in committee rooms and appropriations language. Here's the map, fast, in 5 beats. First, the trigger. What Congress is actually doing, what bills and trips and signals exist, and what they mean in practice. Second, the mechanism, how Congress can block actions without winning an argument on TV, through funding, authorizations, and operational limits. Third, the historical pattern, 3 moments when Congress tried to reassert control over foreign policy and military risk, and what that tells you about today. Fourth, the current stage, where we are now in the cycle, and the 3 signals that confirm it. And fifth, the watch list, the exact indicators, legislative language, budget moves, and alliance reactions that tell you whether this ends as a clear stop, a partial fog, or a long, expensive political war of attrition. Now let's define the headline. Congress is already trying to block a Greenland grab. That doesn't mean Congress has passed a final law. It means the first shots are being fired in the only arena that consistently constrains presidents: the power of the purse. We're seeing bills introduced that aim to prohibit federal funding for any attempt to invade, annex, purchase, or otherwise acquire Greenland, and to restrict expansions of US military presence or influence campaigns there without explicit congressional authorization. The point is not whether every clause survives. The point is that the intent has appeared in writing, early. And early writing is always a sign that the system sees risk. One concrete example, a House bill titled the Greenland Sovereignty Protection Act, H.R. 7013, has been introduced, and its public description makes the goal unmistakable: blocking federal funds tied to invasion, annexation, purchase, or other acquisition of Greenland, and restricting certain escalatory moves without Congress explicitly approving them. That is not symbolic language. That is hard constraint language. At the same time, you're also seeing bipartisan congressional signaling in the form of direct diplomacy. A bipartisan delegation traveling to Copenhagen to reassure Denmark and Greenland is not just a photo op. It's Congress telling allies, the United States is not a single voice. And it's Congress telling the executive branch, we are watching and we are willing to make this expensive or impossible. So what can Congress actually block exactly? Let's get specific, because this is where most commentary gets sloppy. Congress has 3 primary levers: funds, authorizations, and operational limits. First, funds. Congress can prohibit the use of appropriated money for specific activities. That's not a theory, it's a constitutional structure. The appropriations clause is simple. No money comes out of the Treasury unless Congress approves it. And Congress doesn't have to defeat the president's narrative to do it. It can just write, none of this money may be used for X, no funds for planning, no funds for transport, no funds for basing expansion, no funds for influence campaigns, no funds for acquisition-related operations. When lawmakers write it tightly, the executive branch can argue, complain, threaten, or spin, but it can't legally spend. Second, authorizations. Congress can limit what the Defense Department and State Department are allowed to do through annual authorization bills and policy riders. This is the quieter weapon, not just no money, but no legal authority to conduct this class of action without coming back to Congress. It forces an explicit vote. It slows the timeline. It turns unilateral executive momentum into negotiated political friction. Third, operational limits. Congress can restrict the use of force or certain types of military operations through war powers mechanisms and funding constraints. The war powers framework itself is contested in practice, but it still shapes behavior and creates procedural speed bumps, notification requirements, reporting, and political vulnerability if the executive pushes into hostilities without authorization. And in the current environment, that procedural vulnerability matters because the administration is already facing war powers friction on other fronts, with Reuters reporting a recent Senate attempt, though unsuccessful, to limit further military action in Venezuela without congressional approval. The point is not Venezuela. The point is that Congress is actively in constraint mode, not trust mode. Now, why is Congress moving early? Because Congress hates fate's accomplice. Congress hates waking up to a new reality and being told, we already did it, now fund it. If you want to stop an action, you stop it before it becomes operationally normal. That's why lawmakers move early, to prevent momentum from turning into inevitability. Second, Congress wants control of the narrative. The public doesn't follow legal doctrine, it follows stories. If the story becomes Greenland is a national security necessity and we must act, Congress risks being framed as weak or obstructive. So lawmakers try to define the story first. This is reckless. This damages NATO. This is an unnecessary fiscal risk. That's why they name bills with words like sovereignty and protection. It's preemptive framing. Third, Congress is protecting alliances, sometimes for genuine strategic reasons, sometimes because alliances are a political asset, and sometimes because a crisis with a NATO ally is the kind of story that can boomerang back into elections, fundraising, and committee power. This is not cynicism. It's how systems behave. Fourth, Congress is trying to protect the budget. Because even if no soldier fires a shot, an attempt to get Greenland can create real costs. Legal fights, diplomatic blowback, increased posture requirements, and the need for redundancies when trust erodes. That's expensive, and lawmakers, especially those who live inside appropriations, see the cost curve before the public does. Now we reach the core mechanism, the one you must understand in under 2 minutes with zero jargon. Here it is. The president can propose, the president can pressure, the president can posture, but the president cannot sustain a major foreign policy operation without money, logistics, and institutional compliance. And all three are tied, directly or indirectly, to Congress. Think of the executive branch like an engine and Congress like the fuel valve. The engine can rev loudly. It can make the car shake. It can scare everyone in the parking lot. But if the fuel valve closes, the engine stops, no matter how angry the driver is. This is the oldest trick in institutional constraint. Don't argue with the engine. Control the fuel. And in Greenland specifically, the fuel is not just bullets or bombs. It's airlift, it's resupply, it's contracting, it's basing agreements, it's intelligence coordination, it's communications infrastructure, it's the ability to pay for personnel rotation, hazard logistics, and the specialized equipment required to operate in extreme conditions. Even a non-war coercion strategy, like influence campaigns, financial incentives, diplomatic pressure, and incremental control, still requires spending and legal authorities. That's why the money lever matters more than the rhetoric. Now the evidence block, because I want you to see the shape of this, not just feel it. We have public reporting that the administration has discussed options for acquiring Greenland, including not ruling out military force. We have public reporting that U.S. officials discussed the idea of sending lump sum payments to Greenlanders, with figures discussed in a wide band from $10,000 to $100,000 per person, though details are unclear. That matters because it shows the strategy isn't just buy land, it's change incentives, which looks like a political operation, something Congress can target through restrictions on funding and influence activities. We also have a very clear public opinion signal. A Reuters Ipsos survey released mid-January 2026 showed only about 17% of Americans approve of efforts to acquire Greenland, while significant majorities fear it could damage NATO and relationships with European allies. Even if you don't care about polls, lawmakers do, because low public support turns bold action into political liability fast, especially when the story involves pressuring a NATO ally, and we have documented legislative action. The Greenland Sovereignty Protection Act exists as a bill entry with an official title and text availability on congress.gov, and public statements from its sponsor describe it as a funding cutoff for acquisition-related actions. That's the system moving from gossip to statute language. That transition is the real story. Now, the historical precedent triptych, 3 moments where Congress used money and procedure to restrain foreign policy risk, not because history repeats perfectly, but because institutions repeat mechanically. Example 1, the war powers era after Vietnam. Stage 1, dominance. For decades, presidents expanded the practical scope of executive war-making, often with broad political permission in the name of anti-communism and global leadership. Stage 2, overextension. Vietnam became the trauma that made the cost visible, strategically, morally, fiscally. Stage 3, the smart exit. Congress tried to reassert control through procedure and reporting. The War Powers Resolution of 1973 was designed to check the president's ability to keep forces in hostilities without congressional authorization, including a 48-hour notification requirement and a 60-day clock with a withdrawal period. Stage 4, reset. Presidents continued testing boundaries, but the political landscape changed. Unconstrained war-making became more legally and politically contestable. Punchline that mirrors today. When Washington smells overreach, Congress doesn't always stop it with speeches. It tries to stop it with clocks and constraints. Example 2. The Boland Amendments during the 1980s. Stage 1. Dominance. The executive branch pursued aggressive anti-communist strategy in Latin America. Stage 2. Overextension. Covert operations and proxy wars created scandal risk and constitutional tension. Stage 3. The smart exit. Congress used appropriations riders to prohibit funds from being used to support certain operations, specifically restricting assistance linked to the Contras in Nicaragua. Stage 4. Reset. The conflict didn't vanish, but the fight moved into legality, oversight, and enforcement. Punchline that mirrors today: when Congress can't command foreign policy, it can still choke off the parts it refuses to pay for. Example 3. The modern pattern of funding fights as policy fights. Stage 1. Dominance. After 9/11, broad authorizations and security politics expanded executive latitude. Stage 2. Overextension. Over time, prolonged engagements and expanding definitions of conflict created fatigue, skepticism, and procedural backlash. Stage 3. Smart exit. Congress repeatedly tries to narrow or condition operations using war powers votes, authorization debates, and funding restrictions, with mixed success but persistent pressure. Reuters reporting on the recent Venezuela war powers vote, though it failed, shows the mechanism still activates when lawmakers believe the executive is pushing into dangerous ambiguity. Stage 4. Reset. Even when Congress loses a vote, the constraint attempt itself changes behavior by raising political cost and forcing legal justification. Punchline that mirrors today: the restraint machine doesn't have to win every time to matter, it just has to make overreach expensive. Now apply the pattern to Greenland today. Identify the current stage. We are in the fait accompli stage, where the executive is signaling ambition, allies are reacting, and Congress is trying to prevent momentum from hardening into operational reality. That's why you see early bills, early delegations, and early framing. Once helicopters are flying and contracts are signed, stopping becomes harder. So Congress moves now. Here are 3 current signals that match this stage. Signal 1. The administration's escalation language and option framing. Reuters reported the White House described discussions of options for acquiring Greenland and did not remove the possibility of military force. That kind of framing is a red flag for Congress because it implies potential hostilities, alliance damage, and fiscal expansion without prior authorization. Signal 2. Congress moving on both the policy and alliance fronts. We have concrete evidence of legislative drafting, H.R. 7013, and we have congressional diplomacy, with a bipartisan delegation traveling to Copenhagen to reassure Denmark and Greenland, and to counter the perception that the United States is speaking with one unified aggressive voice. That's a classic preemption move: constrain at home, reassure abroad. Signal 3. Public opinion and allied alarm converging. The Reuters Ipsos poll shows low support for acquisition efforts and significant concern about damage to NATO and European relations. Meanwhile, European troop movements and statements framing Greenland's defense as a NATO-wide concern show allies taking the issue seriously as a sovereignty and alliance problem, not just a quirky American headline. When those two pressures combine, low domestic support and high alliance sensitivity, Congress becomes more likely to harden constraints. Now the next domino, what likely happens next, and here's the mini cliffhanger. The fight will shift from speeches to line items. Not should we do this, but what exactly are you trying to fund? The next phase is appropriations and authorization language. Watch for riders that prohibit any activity supporting acquisition, not just military force. Watch for restrictions on expanding the U.S. footprint in Greenland without explicit authorization. Watch for reporting requirements on contacts, influence operations, and contingency planning. Because if Congress can't stop the idea, it can still force the executive to operate inside a cage. Now let's kill skepticism before it spreads, because skepticism is how confusion wins. Objection 1. The president can do whatever he wants in foreign policy. No. The president has real latitude, but sustained operations require funding and legal cover. The Constitution places spending control in Congress, and in practice, the executive branch depends on congressional appropriations. The engine can rev, the fuel valve still matters. Objection 2. Congress never enforces these limits. Sometimes true, sometimes false, but even failed votes change incentives. They force legal arguments, they signal to allies that the U.S. system is divided, they create litigation risk, they create inspector general scrutiny, and they can shape what bureaucracies feel safe doing. The executive can push, but agencies hate stepping into legal gray zones when Congress is loudly watching. Objection 3. This is just politics. It'll fade. Maybe, but the cost of noise politics is real. markets price uncertainty, alliances hedge when they see internal conflict, and bureaucracies slow down when rules feel unstable. That's the silent domestic risk. Volatility at the top becomes friction at the bottom. Objection 4. If Greenland is strategic, shouldn't America pursue it? Strategy is not the same as sovereignty. The US already has a major strategic presence through agreements, including at Pituffik. The question isn't whether the Arctic matters, it's whether coercive acquisition talk damages the alliance architecture that makes Arctic security affordable in the first place. And Congress is signaling that it sees the trade-off. Now the clock and the watch list, urgency without hysteria. Here are the indicators you should monitor and what each one means. Indicator 1. Appropriations language. The single most important signal is whether Congress adds explicit funding prohibitions in must-pass spending bills. Standalone bills are messages. Riders in must-pass appropriations are locks. Indicator 2, authorization constraints. Watch the annual defense authorization and state foreign operations authorization language for clauses requiring explicit congressional approval before increasing U.S. military presence, building new infrastructure, or funding influence activity related to Greenland's political status. If those appear, the cage is being built. Indicator 3, committee posture. When key committees, armed services, foreign relations, appropriations, start holding hearings, demanding briefings, and issuing letters, that's institutional mobilization. It signals the bureaucracy will be cautious and the executive will face procedural drag. Indicator 4. Allied interpretation. The congressional delegation to Copenhagen is a huge tell. When Congress starts doing alliance reassurance directly, it means lawmakers think the executive's posture is creating strategic damage. If European leaders respond positively, the panic may reduce. If European leaders respond by further building independent posture, uncertainty may increase. Indicator 5, public opinion trend. 17% approval is low. If that rises sharply, congressional resistance weakens. If it stays low or drops, resistance hardens, especially heading into elections. Indicator 6, executive workarounds. Watch for attempts to relabel actions as non-military, law enforcement, humanitarian, or security assistance to avoid triggers. That's not always illegitimate, but it's how institutions play games when they feel constrained. When you see aggressive relabeling, it usually means real constraint pressure exists. Timeline? Near term is weeks to a few months. Bill introductions, committee statements, hearings, and delegation diplomacy. Midterm is months to a year, appropriations riders, authorization restrictions, and bureaucratic compliance behavior. Long-term is 1 to 2 years, whether this becomes a permanent friction point between the executive and Congress, creating constant noise that allies and markets begin to treat as the new baseline. The direction matters more than the dates. The question is whether Congress moves from message to must-pass money. Now the practical protocol, how to turn fear into action without pretending you can control Washington. First, reduce concentration risk in your life. If everything depends on one fragile stream, one employer, one platform, one customer type, political volatility hits harder. Keep optionality. Second, protect liquidity and flexibility. In uncertain periods, the people who suffer most are the people who can't adapt without breaking something. Flexibility is resilience. Third, think in duration. The longer your commitments, financial, professional, geographic, the more you're exposed to shifts in rates, costs, and policy. Shorten what you can, keep your life less brittle. Fourth, build small resilience around essentials. Not dramatic, not paranoid, just enough to reduce exposure to spikes in energy, transport, and costs that can arise when the world reprices risk. Fifth, invest in skills that travel. Skills are the most portable hedge against macro noise. Sixth, choose information hygiene. Don't let one headline steer your emotional steering wheel. Track indicators, appropriations language, committee actions, alliance signals. That's how you stay calm. And one, do not do this mistake. Don't make irreversible decisions based on a single political clip. In systems like this, the real constraints move slower than the rhetoric, and the real costs emerge from sustained uncertainty, not one dramatic day. Now the 3 legislative endgames, because this is how it typically resolves. Endgame 1, total block, clear and clean. Congress passes explicit prohibitions that survive, get signed, and become enforceable constraints. The executive pivots to cooperation-only frameworks, access, agreements, investments that don't touch sovereignty. This reduces alliance panic and reduces domestic volatility. It's the stabilizing outcome. Endgame 2, partial block, fog and ambiguity. Congress blocks some things, use of force, explicit annexation, while leaving gray areas around influence, investment, or footprint expansion. The executive operates in the gray, allies hedge, markets price uncertainty. This is the slow leak outcome. No explosion, but more friction. Endgame 3, a long fight, constant noise. Bills, court threats, committee wars, cable news, diplomacy, and repeated incidents of almost escalation. This is the most expensive outcome because uncertainty becomes the baseline. And when uncertainty becomes the baseline, everything costs more: coordination, insurance, logistics, diplomacy, and political attention. So here's the hard landing. Restate the mechanism in one sentence. Congress stops risky foreign policy, moves the same way it stops everything, by controlling money, authority, and operational permission. Restate the stage and the key risk. We're in the pre-fait accompli stage where the system is trying to prevent momentum from becoming reality, and the key risk is not an immediate conflict. It's a prolonged internal fight that raises volatility and makes the alliance look less predictable. 2 final questions, and then we're done. Which outcome do you think is more likely? A clean funding block or a long, noisy fight? And what would you trust more as a signal, the bill text or the must-pass appropriations rider?